All right, so get this. You go to fire up your phone to play some, some classic Nintendo DS games, and boom, your favorite emulator, DraStic, has vanished from the Google Play Store. Like it just went poof overnight.
Yeah, it's pretty weird what happened, and I think the situation kind of shows just how much tension there is between, people who love emulators and the companies who make the original gaming hardware.
Right.
So just to be clear for anyone listening who maybe doesn't know, an emulator is basically a piece of software that lets you play games that were made for one system, like a Nintendo DS, on a totally different device, like your phone.
Exactly. Yeah. And so it's like it's translating the game's language
Exactly.
into something your phone can understand.
Okay. Yeah.
So DraStic, it wasn't just some random emulator. This was like the gold standard. It was
Yeah.
reliable. People loved it. It'd been on the Play Store for over a decade.
For a long time.
And then suddenly it's gone, no warning, no explanation from the developer.
Yeah.
And so, of course, everyone online is going crazy with theories.
Right.
And everyone's pointing the finger at
Nintendo.
Nintendo, exactly.
Yeah, makes sense.
I mean, they're known to be pretty, how do I put this? Protective, let's say, of their intellectual property.
Yeah, they've got a history of being pretty aggressive when it comes to that stuff.
Yeah, but it's not just about, legal stuff. I mean, there's a money angle to this too, right?
Absolutely.
I mean, if people are emulating games, they're not buying the official re-releases or maybe even new consoles.
Right, exactly. It's taking a bite out of their market share.
Right, like it's cutting into their profits, so that makes sense.
Yeah.
But, I mean, emulators themselves, like the actual software, are generally legal, right?
Right.
It's getting those game files, those ROMs.
Yeah.
That's where it gets a bit murky legally.
That's the gray area, yeah.
It's like having a DVD player, but no DVDs to play.
Exactly. A perfect analogy.
And then on top of all this, we have the DMCA, the Digital Millennium Copyright Act, which has all these rules about getting around copy protection. And that's where things get really complicated with emulation. Because some people argue that even if you own the original game cartridge,
Right.
making a ROM from it could still be breaking the DMCA.
Yeah, it's a tricky situation, for sure.
So even if you physically own the game, emulating it might not be totally okay legally.
Yeah, it's not a clear-cut situation.
Wow. Okay, so this is getting really complicated. But didn't the developer of DraStic...
Exophase.
Yeah, Exophase. Didn't they kind of hint at this last year?
They did.
Wasn't there something on their Discord about maybe taking the app down and going open source?
Yes, that's right. And that was around the time that they switched DraStic from a paid app, it was like $4.99, to being totally free.
Okay, yeah.
So going open source would basically mean they make the app's code public. Anyone can change it and share it.
Yeah.
It's often a way to keep software alive and accessible for a long time.
That's really interesting. So even though there was no official announcement about DraStic going away, there were some clues that it might happen.
Right. It wasn't a complete surprise.
What could this have been, like a planned move by Exophase maybe to avoid any legal trouble with Nintendo down the road?
It's definitely possible. And I think Nintendo's, they've been really tough on emulation lately.
Right.
Like, remember when they pressured the developers of that Switch emulator Rejinx to take their code off of GitHub?
Yeah.
And then there was that lawsuit against the people who made Yuzu and Citra.
Right. Two other big emulators.
Yeah. And that ended with a huge $2.4 million settlement. And those projects had to shut down back in February 2024.
Wow. Yeah. So that shows you how serious Nintendo is about this stuff.
Definitely.
So we've got Nintendo fiercely protecting their games. And on the other side, we've got developers and players who want to keep these old games alive and playable.
It's a clash of perspectives for sure.
Yeah. It's like a battle between preserving the past and protecting profits.
And it really shows just how complex things have become in the digital age.
Right.
We've got these laws that were made for a world of physical stuff, and they're struggling to keep up with how fast technology is changing and how we experience media these days.
Right. And speaking of experiencing things, some of the comments on that article you shared are really interesting.
Yeah.
One person's wondering if maybe DS games are going to be on the next generation of Nintendo's online service.
That's an interesting theory.
Could that be why DraStic got pulled?
It's possible. I mean, Nintendo's been adding more and more to their online service, and
Yeah.
putting DS games on there would be huge for a lot of players.
It would make sense for them business-wise, too, right? They could tap into that nostalgia.
Absolutely.
And maybe even deal with some of these worries about game preservation.
Right. It could be a smart move for them.
But what about the people who like playing on their phones or other devices?
Well, that's where the APK file for DraStic comes in.
Right.
Even though it's gone from the Play Store, the APK, which is basically the file you need to install it is still out there online.
Oh, okay.
And you can even use it on devices like the Retroid Pocket 4 Pro and the Ouya.
Right.
So it just shows you how technology can sometimes find ways around these attempts to control it.
So even though it's not in the official store anymore, DraStic isn't completely dead.
Right. It's kind of like a digital phoenix rising from the ashes.
Yeah, and it shows how determined both the technology and the communities that love it can be.
Exactly. Yeah, it's like someone scattered seeds and they found a new place to grow. And that kind of makes you think about, like, what is DraStic going away, whether it was on purpose or someone made them do it? What does that say about saving old games and being able to play them in the future?
That's a really good point.
It's a tricky situation, right?
Yeah.
You've got companies like Nintendo, they want to protect what they made and they want to make money from it.
Right.
But then you've got all these gamers and developers, they want to save these old games and make sure everyone can play them.
Yeah, it's like a philosophical debate almost.
Yeah.
Where do you draw the line between, protecting someone's work and making sure these games don't just disappear?
Exactly. And it's not just about nostalgia or playing your old favorites.
Right.
Think about researchers who are studying video games.
Yeah.
What if they can't access certain games because of legal stuff or because the games are just gone?
That'd be awful. It's like losing a piece of history.
Exactly.
And someone in the comments mentioned the DMCA being used to stop people from emulating games, even on their own hardware.
Yeah.
It's crazy to think that even if you own the game and the console, you could still get in trouble for emulating it.
It is a bit mind-boggling, right?
Yeah.
That's the argument some people are making, and it raises questions about what ownership really means in the digital world.
Right.
It's like buying a book, but being told you can only read it in a certain chair in a certain room with a certain lamp on.
Yeah, that seems a bit much, doesn't it? Like, shouldn't you be able to experience something you own the way you want to, especially if it's not hurting anyone else?
Right. A lot of people feel that way, and it gets even more complicated when some of these old games just aren't available to buy anymore.
Right.
Like digital stores shut down,
Right.
physical copies get rare and expensive.
Yeah, you're lucky to find them.
And even if you can find a way to buy a game, there's no guarantee it'll work on your computer or console.
So it's like a race against time to save these games before they're gone forever.
Exactly.
And that's where things like open source emulation projects and digital archives become super important, right?
Absolutely. Those are vital efforts.
I was reading about these groups of people who are working to save old games and even make them work on modern computers.
Yeah, the emulation community is amazing. They're so dedicated and creative.
It's really inspiring to see.
They're always pushing the limits, figuring out ways to make these classic games playable on everything from phones to powerful PCs.
Right.
And it's not just about making them playable, they're also documenting the history of these games, creating resources for researchers and making sure future generations can experience them.
Yeah, it's awesome to see that kind of passion, especially when you think about these big companies and all the legal stuff going on.
It just shows you the power of games and the communities that form around them. They're more than just entertainment. They're part of our culture. They show how far technology has come, and they often hold really personal memories for people.
That's a great way to put it.
So preserving them isn't just a hobby, it's a responsibility.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And speaking of responsibility, do you think companies like Nintendo have a role to play in preserving games?
That's a good question.
Could they work with the emulation community or create official archives that would make both sides happy?
I think that would require a big change in how they think about things.
Right.
They'd have to see emulation not as a threat, but as something that could help them.
Yeah.
Imagine if Nintendo released their own emulators for their old consoles.
Yeah.
Players could access all those classic games, and Nintendo could still control how the games are shared.
That would be amazing. It'd be a win-win for everyone.
It would.
But for now, it seems like it's still a game of cat and mouse.
It does.
Nintendo tries to stop emulators. Emulators find new ways to keep going, and gamers are stuck in the middle.
Yeah. It's a complex situation, and it's hard to say what will happen in the future.
It is.
Yeah.
But it's definitely something we need to keep talking about.
For sure.
But for now, let's switch gears a bit and talk about something a little lighter.
Okay.
You know how people say video games can be addictive?
Yeah, I've heard that.
Well, someone in the comments was talking about how easy it is to lose track of time when you're playing games.
Right.
They said they spent a whole weekend playing their favorite DS game on DraStic and completely forgot about the real world.
Oh, wow.
I've definitely been there. Have you ever had an experience like that?
I can definitely relate to that feeling of getting totally lost in a game. I remember when I was younger.
Yeah, it really is amazing how games can just suck you in like that. It's like you step into another world. But this whole DraStic thing has got me thinking beyond, the legal stuff and preserving games, what about our own responsibility as gamers?
Yeah. What do we owe to the creators and to the games themselves?
Right? Like, is it ever okay to download a ROM of a game you don't own, even if you just want to try out a classic or, for archival purposes?
That's a tough question, and everyone has to decide that for themselves. It's not black and white. There's a lot of gray area.
Yeah, it's tricky. I get why people say it's wrong because those games are someone's work and they should get paid for it. But what happens when you just can't buy those games anymore?
Yeah. What happens when they disappear from official stores?
Right. Do they just vanish into the digital ether?
It's a real problem, and with everything moving to digital, it's easier than ever to lose access to games. If
Yeah.
you can lose or break physical copies,
Right.
digital stores can shut down.
Yeah, and then you're out of luck.
And even if you can find a game to buy, who knows if it'll work on your computer or console?
Exactly. It's like a ticking time bomb for game preservation.
Yeah.
In one of the articles you sent, there was this talk about abandonware, games that no one's selling or supporting anymore.
Right.
Do you think there should be like a law or something for abandonware? A way to make those games playable without breaking any rules?
That's a really interesting idea. It would be tricky, though. You'd have to make sure creators are still protected,
Right.
but also recognize how important these games are culturally and historically.
Exactly.
Maybe there could be a system where after a certain amount of time, games become like public domain,
Yeah.
so people could preserve and share them without legal issues.
That would be incredible. It'd be like opening up this huge library of gaming history for everyone.
You would.
But until then, it seems like it's up to both gamers and the companies that make these games to figure out how to work together.
I agree. It's about finding some middle ground,
Right?
understanding each other's points of view,
Yeah.
and ultimately making sure these amazing games don't disappear forever.
Well said. So as we wrap up this deep dive into the mystery of DraStic's disappearance, it seems like we have more questions than answers.
We do.
But I think that's a good thing, right? It means the conversation's just getting started.
Definitely. I think it's important to keep exploring these issues and talking about them openly.
Yeah.
We need to challenge what we think we know, and hopefully we can create a future where preserving games isn't a fight, but a team effort, where everyone's working together to make sure future generations can experience the magic of these digital worlds.
That's a perfect way to end this. Thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive. It's been a really thought-provoking conversation.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.